In this presentation, I will explore some of my different interests and influences that have accumulated into my own practice and thoughts about my work. Hopefully, this will help to situate myself contextually. In front of you is a photo of an unfinished project that I was unable to complete due to the current situation. As I shall explain, this is perhaps quite ironic, as a lot of my research was and is based around the benefits of being in the middle of an unresolved situation. The project's resolution would be a film of myself in a suit running with the plane and trying to fly for a few moments. I would repeat this process of running and jumping until the plane starts to break apart and is no longer usable, or when I can no longer jump, whichever gives up first.
I don't know. I said only away from here, always away from here, only by doing so can I reach my destination. And so, you know your destination, he asked. Yes, I answered. Didn't I say so? Away from here, that is my destination.
I start with a section of Kafka's short story, My Destination, read by Judith Butler, as it summarizes the mechanics that I have been preoccupied with for most of the year. It is the mechanism of striving forwards towards an infinitely receding end point, and how in doing so, this infinite motion becomes a form of destination in of itself. This also reminded me of Sol LeWitt's 35 sentences on conceptual art, particularly number 10. I quote, "Ideas alone can be works of art. They are in a chain of development that may eventually find some form. All ideas need not be made physical." In summer, when I was initially thinking about what I would make this year, I saw the film Fly Away Home. In this one clip, there's this really beautiful moment where the father is running down the hill and flies. This was perhaps the first moment when I decided I would build my own plane. At the beginning, I really believed I could potentially make something that could fly. There was even one moment where I thought I had just invented a new wing system that incorporated balance springs that would help the user flap the wings at the touch of a hand, similar in a way to the vehicles of Pan America. But as the project continued, I became more aware of the absurdity of that suggestion, and began to concentrate on perhaps the more important aspect, the process and the idea itself. In Kafka's two unfinished novels, The Trial and the Castle, Kay, the protagonist, is stuck in a seemingly infinite struggle with an authority that cannot ever be accessed directly. Deleuze points out, in Kafka Towards a Minor Literature, that both novels are unfinished, and within them Kay seems to make no progress. So one can imagine the story to continue without resolution, as does My Destination, until Kay's death. I bring in Deleuze here, as he has been fundamental for my understanding of desire as a machinage, and how all life is a series of flows of energy from one desiring machine to the next, and that the only way we can form an identity is when these flows are stopped, when the machine uncouples. This is perhaps why Deleuze talks of difference being primary to identity. Going back to the trial, something that particularly struck me is how, in both the trial and the castle, Kay seems to get so much joy and purpose out of this struggle. The non-satisfaction of Kay's desire gives a life force to the character, driving him forward and giving him meaning. The knowledge of his inability to succeed does not freeze Kay or the master. Instead, it propels them forward. It is with these two things in mind that I approached my CP essay. Firstly, that the gap between you and what you desire forms the basis of your identity, and secondly, this desire to obtain what you want creates meaning in your life. In the essay, I argued against the capitalist drive to satisfy your desire as quickly as possible, as I think it has a subduing effect, and to put forward the argument, supplemented by psychoanalysis, that the frustration of what you desire is one of the primary drives in early childhood to the formation of your consciousness. In a reading group, we studied Timotheus Vermeulen and Robin van der Aker's Notes on Metamodernism. In this text, it puts forward the stance of being between two poles. I was really excited by this text, as it put into words a lot of the concepts that I had been thinking about for a while, even though I'm not completely won over by their need to create this separate category of the metamodern. I quote, "Metamodernism moves for the sake of moving, attempts, in spite of its inevitable failure, it seeks forever for a truth that it never expects to find." To summarize the stance that they put forward, that if modernism is characterized by grand narratives of truth and ultimate reason that can create objective understandings, and that postmodernism can be characterized as a rejection to these grand narratives, to dismiss them with irony and nihilism, then the metamodern is, quote, "inspired by modern naivety, yet informed by postmodern skepticism," end quote. It exists in a both-neither dynamic, quote. "It oscillates between a modern enthusiasm and a postmodern irony," end quote. One artist that has been particularly influential on my practice is the artist Bastiaan Arder. Arder is highlighted as one of the artists in Notes on Metamodernism that embodies the stance of informed naivety, as they write, quote, "Arder could have equipped himself with a better boat in order to sail the seas, and that he could have trained himself better in the art of tree climbing in order to longer hang on to the branches. The reason these artists haven't opted to employ methods and materials better suited to their mission or task is that their intention is not to fulfill it, but to attempt to fill it in spite of its unfulfillableness." End quote. This is precisely what sets him apart from other performance artists, such as Matthew Barnett with his restricted drawings, where Arder strives to complete the impossible and, by failing to do so, shows his limitations. Barney sets limitations to his body in order to show how he can overcome them. Arder's performances naturally speak to a wider audience. We are all held down by gravity, and, in contrast, Barney pushes the audience away and says, "Look at me, look at what I can overcome." Another artist whose work I feel resonates with the metamodern tendencies is the duo Ilya and Ella Kabakov.
Касается утопии. Я думаю, что пока человек жив, он будет верить в эту утопию. Она ему необходима для того, чтобы приподняться над уровнем бытия.
Да, конечно. Это и есть вот как бы реальность. Просто это, как бы мы все время продуцируем фантазию, но мы знаем, что мы не можем оторваться от
Нет, мы
земли.
пытаемся
Мы
оторваться.
надо пытаться.
One of Ilya Kabakov's motifs is that of the character. In his installation, The Man Who Flew into Space from His Apartment, we have this story full of hope. There is the machine in the middle and the hole in the roof. As the character is gone, the installation proposes this potential of what if he made it into space? We cannot know, for he is gone. A project that I have been working on is this installation of a small boat filled with all of my necessary belongings, made as if I was living on it. I didn't get very far with it, and only have the rough sketches of what it could possibly look like. In the duration of this quarantine, I have been making some of the furniture out of wood and nails scavenged from nearby skips. The initial proposal included a journey from my parents' house, where the boat is kept, to Manchester by canal. I estimated it would take me about 2 weeks to complete this journey. Like the Kabakov installation, the character would not be present. The viewers would gradually get to understand the story through examination of open notebooks, printed emails, logbooks, and so on. The installation was partly a response to my own anxiety of trying to find alternative ways of living after the student loans ran out, and imagining an absurd response to the inevitable large-scale flooding of cities in the future based on current projections of climate change. I have been reading a lot of George Monbiot and other works about the Anthropocene, and I think it is almost impossible to not be thinking and consumed by this looming dread, which will definitely filter into artists' practice one way or another. To link back to the metamodern, one response to this overwhelming event is that even though we are faced with this absolutely hopeless situation, we must act as if there is hope so that we can continue. This is a quote from Albert Camus's appendix to the Mythosisyphus called Hope and Absurdity in the Work of Franz Kafka. Quote, if Kafka wants to express the absurd, he will make use of consistency. You know the story of the crazy man who was fishing in a bathtub. A doctor with ideas as to psychiatric treatments asks him if they were biting, to which he responded the harsh reply, of course not, you fool, since this is a bathtub. That story belongs to the Baroque type, but in it can be grasped quite clearly to what a degree the absurd effect is linked to an excess of logic. Kafka's world is in truth an indescribable universe in which man allows himself the tormenting luxury of fishing in a bathtub, knowing that nothing will come out of it. End quote. In this short tale, Camus sums up the correlation of an excess of logic with absurdity. This excess of logic is also well portrayed by the artist Alfred Jarry's Pataphysics, Chris Dobrowski's Escape Vehicles, Samuel Beckett's writings, and numerous others. With the boat and the plane, I also wanted to encapsulate this pushing of logic into the absurd. With the two pieces of the plane and the boat, the absurd needs to be portrayed in different ways. The plane as an object by itself is quite mundane. However, when it is performed, it then points towards this absurdity. The boat, on the other hand, is absurd in its very nature, overspilling with an excess of items one supposedly needs to live with. Finally, I will leave you here with an image of myself flying the plane. Thank you very much for listening.